In this series of videos, we'll explore how Business Role Manager helps address SAP access control issues through centralized role design, testing, and maintenance. We'll try to provide detailed information on setting up different types of role creation, testing, and maintenance in an automated fashion, starting from requirements through conceptual design to production-ready roles, which are free from access risks to enforce compliance and to prevent access risks per regulations and company policies. Business Role Manager 2 modeling tool is based on a pattern analysis and policy validation, which is used to simplify the process for collecting, assessing, and analyzing established and existing roles. New roles also can be defined and analyzed for their risks using what-if scenarios. For example, you can do that with simulations of risk analysis in your landscape before testing your new roles or during the creation of new roles. So this BRM tool will help you access what kind of risks can come into your system while creating a new role or while assigning new roles or adding a transaction code to new roles. So you can basically run simulations and using what-if scenarios. And this activity helps you keep your IT environment as part of the clean phase of your GRC initiative. Okay, so the BRM also acts as a trusted system, as a single repository system for reporting and analytics tool to optimize roles by monitoring usage and effectiveness, reporting role risks and role usage and tracking role changes for audit compliance. Right. So this tool actually wasn't really popular because in the earlier versions, because of some bad experiences by some customers due to its inability to do certain, certain functions, right? So from version 2 10.x, right, to GRC 10.0 onwards, most of the issues that were there earlier within this tool, most of those issues were addressed and improved upon. Now, those who implemented this business role manager as part of their SAP Access Control 10.x implementations are now able to manage SAP Access Controls from GRC tools really well. Okay, so this BRM tool basically, helps you automate your role definition process and managing the roles. And some of the details, the role attributes are also the details that define a role during the role definition and creation process. Okay, so what are the advantages of a BRM? Okay, so one of the advantages or some of the advantages that you have is that access control can be a central repository of all SAP systems connected in your landscape as far as roles is concerned. Okay, so that's a big advantage. So you have, if your GRC system is connected with, let's say, ECC system or S/4HANA system and your BI system and CRM system, solution manager, and HANA and whatnot, you can basically connect all those systems to your GRC system, and you can manage their roles, manage the roles within those systems through access control in using the BRM module. So that is a big plus point for us, right, on this. And it's always a best practice to implement business role manager before implementing access request manager. SAP has also, for example, right, and the access control also has a module called access request manager. Access request manager is basically for user provisioning. Now, how you utilize that tool could be, based on your MSMP configuration and BRF plus, rules and etc. and whatnot, right? If you're using MSMP, you go through the approval processes, right? From user request creation steps till role assignments to ultimately user creation itself in the requested systems. So this whole process flow is defined within as MSMP, and then you can create, depending on your conditions and your processes, you could create BRF rules to be used in MSMP, right? So before using ARM, it is always a good practice to implement BRM also, right? So the roles that are not part of BRM, you cannot utilize them as part of ARM. So somehow, whether you implement BRM or not as a module, the backend roles, right, the roles from different systems need to exist in the access control, okay, which comes under the BRM module. Now, the basic reason for this is that both tools use roles and attributes from the plugin systems, which is your backend systems, right? Like ECC and Solution Manager and BI and CRM and all. So both of these tools, right, use roles and attributes from all these backend systems, the plugin systems, for SAP Access Control system, and that information is stored in shared tables within the GRC system. Now, if you start the implementation with the business role manager, this tool will have enough information related to the plugin roles, that is the backend roles, during user provisioning, right, which is the ARM module. Okay. Now, if you plan to skip the BRM module, right, implementing BRM module, and carry on only with the access request manager module, right, ARM module, your overhead on maintaining role attributes will be very high due to manually oriented process. So what happens is in that case is, right, so if you don't implement BRM module, right, so you first will have to bring in all the backend roles into access control. There is a step process to do that. There's a procedure to do that. And once it comes in, all you bring in all the roles, then you have to manually go and assign various role attributes, right? Like whether the role is productive or not, who the role approvers are, who are the secondary role approvers, what are the org level units, and various role attributes that play a role in your MSMP process. Depending on some of these attributes, you can define your MSMP flow for approval processes. So that's going to be a manual and task, right? So if you have hundreds of roles, you would have to do that, and plus, again, if your role naming convention is not properly designed, there are many people, many places where customers where they don't have a solid role naming convention. So the more problematic your role design is in the backend plugin systems, the more manual effort you'll have to engage in to make all those roles compatible for ARM. Okay, so when I say compatible, you'll have to maintain the role attributes in AC in BRM module. Like I said, like role owners, for example, right? You will have to do manually for each and every role one at a time. Or if there is a pattern of the roles, uh, if a role becomes with a pattern, you can maybe do a mass maintenance, but still it is going to be manual process. Okay, so because of that, the maintenance of role attributes will be very, very high, okay, because of the manually oriented process. And if any single step is unknowingly missed in this manual process, it might lead to additional overhead from the troubleshooting view, okay. So it's advisable that, you implement BRM before you do, if you're doing ARM or implementing ARM. Now, like I said, right, SAP Access Control is a central repository for all systems connected in your landscape to track the role status during the design and maintenance, especially when multiple landscapes are introduced in your enterprise. Okay, in addition to many more enhancements and add-on options are also provided in the in BRM. Okay, so such as in central user administrator roles or an improved integration with transaction PXAG, role recertification, right? Object-level security, linking test documents using via URLs, and you also have some BADI and to improve custom code integration with key integration um, points. Now, apart from all these, right? So there are some of these reasons that you have to justifying the implementation of the tools, right? So, for example, you have a functionality or an ability to maintain consistency or ensure consistency in role naming conventions across the landscape. Okay, so that you could do. You could have when it comes to role naming convention, you could have a particular role naming convention for derived roles or single roles or a business role or a composite role. Now you could also track role status of the role, right, during maintenance. And like I said, it's a central repository of role management. And risk analysis is another one where when creating the role itself, you can run risk analysis simulations and see, what if there are any SOD violations while creating the role or adding a transaction code to a role. Now, apart from this, you could also automate your role recertification, right? So many places roles are recertified by controllers and business role owners and managers to decide whether a particular user needs to keep a role or not, whether from audit compliance standpoint, the role recertifications have to be done from time to time. So BRM tool helps you automate those role recertification, right? So this role recertification ensures the business managers participate and buy into role assignments that are needed along with risk management during role creation, right? So that is one big advantage you have from an audit standpoint, um, the role recertification, user recertification standpoint. Okay. And again, like we said, right, it's a central repository, it's a trusted system of record for reporting and analytics. So organizations are able to optimize roles by monitoring usage and effectiveness, as well as track role changes for audit and compliance. Okay. Now, beyond the technical roles, right? So you also have something called as business roles, right? So, so beyond the technical roles, such as single roles and composite roles and derived roles, now these business roles provides certain levels of certain advantages too. Okay. We will see what are the in a couple of slides. We'll see what is the difference between what is a business role and what does it mean, right? What does it do? So the business roles gives you the advantages such as when requesting role creation uh, and assignment in business terms, it basically simplifies the process, because the business roles basically represent a job function, right? So depending on your job function, a user's job function, and if the user has to be provisioned in different plugin systems, like, it has to be, user ID has to be provisioned in say ECC and BI and CRM system, for example, right? So in all these systems, you can, you'll have to assign roles which are specific to that system, right? But those roles roles are assigned as per the user's business function or job title, correct? So business roles basically are like composite roles, right? So you can create a business role in BRM, which includes all these single roles or technical roles, whatever, whether it's composite role or a derived role or whatever. Uh, from your plugin systems, you can put them into one business role and assign the business role to the user. Okay, so GRC, AC, BRM tool, access control tool will take care of assigning the roles in the individual plugin systems accordingly. Okay, now, like I said, right, business roles hold one or more technical or business role. So for providing easy maintenance to security team to maintain few variants to satisfy a wide variety of users in a single business process. Okay, so you have some of these advantages, like I said, right? Mainly, you know, it's a central repository of role management. You can There are tools or reports that you can use to identify whether there are duplicate roles, whether some roles are being used or not, or depending on what the usage is, you could decide to remove the roles from your landscape or whatever you want to do. That helps you identify such roles, and you can run simulations and do risk analysis before creating while creating the role itself, and before adding transaction codes or whatever. You could also run simulations, so you'd see whether the new transaction codes, whether they introduce any SOD conflicts or not. So using BRM, there are certain advantages like these, and it helps automate, helps you in MSMP, automated approval process. And then user recertification and role recertification is again another example where it's very, very useful, this BRM tool. And business roles again is a fantastic concept that BRM has, where you can create a business role which is, in technical terms, you can consider it to be a composite role. But in this case, it's a composite type of a kind of a role that includes that could include single roles, any type of role, right? It could include from any landscape, any backend system, plugin system, right? It could include a composite role itself. See, technically, a composite role cannot have a composite role, but in a business role, you could assign a composite role. So it's a collection. A business role is a collection or a repository of technical roles from your plugin systems. Okay. All right. Now let us see the role management process. As security administrators, basically what the role creation process is, right? The role design team basically comes up with the business needs and identifies the requirements and all that, and then they also try to understand, evaluate what the uh, approach should be for designing the roles or the role design security strategy. And when security that is decided, security administrators, they start maintaining the role and then also perform risk analysis, right? Whether to see if there are any risks involved in creation of the role or writing the transaction codes to the role. And they also manage the risks, right? So managing of the risk is like, so during the role creation process, risk verification using this BRM tool, right? So the risk verification can be performed with the help of Access Risk Analysis tool, which is your ARA tool. So before you implement ARM, we are saying that, it's a good idea to implement BRM. But even before you implement BRM, ARA, that module ARA, right, Access Risk Analysis tool should be implemented, because all of these tools, right, ARA and all your risk analysis, all the definitions of risk analysis, the configuration of risk analysis, and all mitigation controls and all, it is done in ARA module, the Access Risk Analysis module, the tool. Okay. Now the rule sets defined in Access Risk Analysis, right, works interactively with BRM. So the necessary corrective measures can be adopted by the role designer, and a new role can be vetted by the role owners based on the risk analysis results. Okay, so technical experts and business process owners can also document the role definitions and perform automated risk assessments track changes to the roles, as and conduct maintenance with ease, which basically increases consistency in collaborative environments. Okay, so process of managing risks. So risk functionality provides enhanced support for security analysts, right? So you decide as a security analyst or a security administrator, you decide whether to assign a transaction code within a role or not, depending on your risk analysis report. So it gives you insight into business role access risk, uh, about inter-role and intra-role conflicts. Meaning if you assign a role, assign two roles together, whether it's going to create any conflict or not. Uh, the configuration enabled presence of generated roles in targeted system determines availability of provisioning. System specific role availability for provisioning subject to validity dates, right? Okay, so what are the different types of roles we have, right? So BRM has, I just listed 5 of those, but there are some of the other ones also, like, the HANA, the S4 HANA roles, I did not list it here, for example. So typically, when, we will work through some of these roles, like, we'll create, in our demo videos, we'll create single roles, composite roles, derived roles, and business roles. You know what the single roles are. I don't want to go into what a single role is, composite role is, or derived role is. But we'll see what the difference between composite roles and derived roles are. So what is the difference between composite roles and business roles, right? So let's go through the, what we have written down here. What is a composite roles? Composite role is a collection of single roles, right? That's technical single roles. And what is a business role? A business role consists of single roles or number of composite roles from different landscapes, actually, right? So it consists of single roles. Composite role consists of single roles from the same landscape, whereas a business role can consist single roles and composite roles from different landscapes. When I say different landscapes, it means roles from ECC system or S4HANA system or BI systems, etc. All the roles from all this landscape can be put in one single business role, okay, in access control, in BRM. Now, uh, so what is the difference between composite role and a business role? Now, composite roles is, like is a collection of single roles, right? But the single roles have to be from the same landscape. And whereas a business role is it's a container. It consists of single roles or number of composite roles from different landscapes. Okay, so these are the main big difference. Second thing is, another thing is the single composite roles are created in the backend systems. That is your BCC, ECC, BI, BW plugin systems. Whereas a business role cannot be created in the backend system. Okay, the back concept of business roles do not exist in your ABAP-based systems like ECC or BI or CRM or Solution Manager for that matter. Okay, so there is no concept of business roles in your plugin systems. Now, for composite role, it has a physical identity in BRM and backend both. So meaning it exists both, right? Once you start maintaining roles through BRM, so the roles definition exists in BRM as well as then it is pushed to the backend system also. Okay, but for business role, it does not have any physical identity, right? It's just a concept of BRM, right? And can be created only in the BRM tool. It cannot be created in the backend plugin systems. Now, a composite role can be imported via file or import directly via backend system. Okay, whereas a business role can be imported into an BRM by via only to a file. Okay, then again, the only commonality here in this case is the methodology for composite role does not have, there is no concept of maintaining authorizations or generating roles for a composite role, right? So similarly, you don't have a concept of generating roles or maintaining authorizations for a business role. Okay, these are some of the key differences between a composite role and a business role. Now let us see quickly in a briefly what are the different configuration or post installation steps that you would need to perform for implementing GRC, a BRM module. Okay, so basically you need to activate BC sets, and then you have to work through assigning connectors to the connector groups and then adding connectors to required the scenarios, the integration scenarios, and then you also have to associate actions and assigning default connectors. Then you have to maintain the parameters, right? The configuration parameters, mainly in the GRC system, okay? And there may be some parameters which are not directly linked with a BRM, but you could implement some of the parameters where for which are related to risk terminator, where you could, when creating the role, you could say warn the person, security administrator, about the risks of adding a role or adding a transaction code to a role, etc. So there are parameters that control that. So we will see what those parameters are. But those parameters have to be maintained in the GRC system as well as the plugin systems. Okay, but only in that case. Otherwise, there are no specific configuration parameters that you need to maintain in the plugin systems. Now you have basically 5 BC sets that you would need to activate for BRM. Okay, so these are the 5 BC sets that you need to activate. So what these BC sets contain, we will see in our demo video when we try to activate these BC sets. Okay, so now adding a connector to the required scenarios. In the integration scenarios for BRM, you need these 3 scenarios, okay, to be maintained for role management: role MG, auth, and provisionings. Okay, these have to be done. Now, some of these, all these steps. This step is done as PRO. So these 3 integration scenarios have to be maintained. Okay, role MG, auth, and PROV. We'll see how we do that. And also the parameters, right? The configuration parameters. Now these range from between 3000 to basically 4000. We'll go in detail in a video, another video. We'll see what those parameters are related to BRM and what they do. Okay. Now, most of these attributes that the parameters that you have are in the configuration are related to role attributes. Okay, so keep that, we have to remember that. So depending on what parameters you set in the configuration parameters you set, the BRM will behave accordingly. Okay. Now let's see what else. Okay, so next step that you have, another step you need to do is you need to create users. You need to designate who the role approvers, the role owners are going to be, or who the approvers are going to be. So any role owner would need this role, right? SAP GRC role management, role owner role. And like we know that every GRC user will need by default these three roles, okay? But from a role owner standpoint, you also need to assign this particular role, GRC role management, role owner role, to all role owners and approvers. Once that is done, you also need to define the role owners in access control. Okay, we'll see how to do that in a demo video too. Then we come to configuration, right? Let's see what are the different, quickly see what the BRM configuration steps are from a GRC system standpoint. Okay, so the first thing that you need to do is to define, and that the type of rules you're going to use. That's a mandatory step that you have to perform. And it's all done in IMG, okay? So in this pro transaction under access control, under BRM module, the business role manager module, you have to activate the role types, which is a mandatory step to perform. So we'll see what it is. You'll have to see what okay, there was a typo here, which is basically you'll have to also maintain the role labels, okay, for basically describing what roles are, whether it's related to project or a support or whatever, right? And what languages are. Now we'll see what this is. Okay, that's an optional step. We'll see what that is. There's another optional step you need to maintain is the maximum length of the role depending on the role types. Okay, for example, technical roles in SAP backend system, you can have up to 30 characters, right? In ABAP systems. If it's a HANA role, you probably have, I think, 26 characters max that you could use for this thing, for the length of the role. Then you also have to create businesses and sub-processes. So all these mandatory steps, just so that you know, right, these are the role attributes that you could use in MSMP. Okay, so depending on what your business process controls are, you can design and define your workflow, MSMP workflow for approval processes. Okay, so business and sub process, business process and process and sub process is basically another mandatory step that you need to perform, create. Okay, so we'll see how to create that. The other thing that I personally think is a very good feature that BRM has is the naming convention, right? It's an optional thing. If you don't define a role naming convention as part of this configuration customizing process, as you can create your own roles in BRM. Okay, BRM does not stop you from creating your own role names, whatever pattern you want. But having a role naming convention defined as a customizing step in customization, I think it's a good idea. Okay, so we'll see what it is and we'll take an example of configuring it, defining a role definition, role naming convention process, role naming convention for our roles, okay, single roles, composite role and derived roles. Other role attributes that you have to maintain is in a project release, which is also mandatory. Role status is mandatory. Again, like I said, mandatory attributes can be used for MSMP flow. Role sensitivity, you can create critical levels, assign critical levels for the roles. Companies, you can create companies, functional areas, okay, the roles that belong to certain functional areas, and what are the prerequisites for creating a role or assigning a role, basically. Okay, so you can do that, and then you can also do organizational mapping, okay, the org level mapping that we do in roles, right? We can do that also. one of the bigger steps that you have in customization is your methodology process, right? What is your role definition methodology, right? What are the different stages that you'll have to go through while creating or managing a role? So you can also define uh, that methodology, right? So SAP gives you 7 stages, which you can see in the screenshot: definition, action and permissions, risk analysis, derivation, generation, testing, and approval. There are 7 stages that SAP provides as default, but you don't have to use what SAP gives you. You can create your own methodology. Okay, so but there is only one methodology that will be active anytime. Okay, you can create as many as you want, but a valid only one can be made active. Okay, so for example, we don't let's say you don't have a testing, you don't want to include testing in your methodology, right? While defining the roles or creating the roles, so you can remove your testing. You don't want approvals, you can remove approvals. If your company, your project, you don't have a need for derived roles, right? So you can remove the derivation phase out of this methodology step. Okay, so depending on what your requirements are, what your strategy is, you can define your methodology, role definition methodology, process and steps. Okay, and once this is done, right, another big aspect that you need to keep in mind is to schedule some of these 4 jobs, you know, and usually they're all done because of the ARA module, Access Risk Analysis module. Now, the Access Risk Analysis module, for these 4 jobs have to be scheduled in the background or need to be run. Okay, so we and assume that you know what these jobs do. Okay, they're all in under jobs, synchronization jobs node, and authorization data repository, which is object sync, which basically syncs up your backend systems, user IDs, roles, and profiles and all with your GRC system, action usages, the transaction codes that are being used in the backend system, and the roles that are being used in the backend systems. Okay, all that data from the backend system need to be synced into the GRC system. So the synchronization jobs need to be scheduled or run so that BRM has all the latest and updated information in the access control GRC system. Okay, so this was a brief overview of BRM. Uh, Next, what we'll see is we'll see that configuration steps that are needed to some of all these configuration steps that we're talking about here. We'll see what those steps are and one by one. Okay.